Right, hello, very good morning. My name is Adam, and I'm going to talk about generating healthcare data for transformation through crowds. Before I begin, I noticed that there's a fair bit of overseas delegates and speakers, so a very warm welcome to Singapore. I hope you enjoy my fine country, right? So a very quick introduction. My name is Adam. I am a health informatician. At this point, I need to explain a little bit on what that means. It is not IT in healthcare. That is called IT. Health informatics is slightly different. And I run a social enterprise with the name of Binary Healthcare. I'm not going to bore you too much on that because of time limitation, but I do have a web portal. So if you're interested in finding more about me and my work, please kindly visit the web portal. Now, quick question. Who is involved in healthcare? Health and healthcare, there's a difference. So, okay, 1, 2, 3. Got a fair bit. Yes, Lady Boss is there, right? Most influential person in Singapore for healthcare IT, okay? And for those who are in healthcare, do you use or generate data for your crowdsourcing platform? No? Yes? Okay, nevertheless, I hope this is going to be a good talk to you. Do note that I'm not going to advocate on why crowdsourcing for healthcare. I'm going to go straight into the topic because of time limitation. I'm going to introduce a concept to you guys today, the concept of interoperability. Briefly and fundamentally given, it means information exchange between different health and healthcare entities. And this can be between people or organizations. Now, to break down the topic of interoperability, if I were to go by the academic version, there will be 6 levels of interoperability. But in the industry, we usually just define it as 3. So I'm just going to briefly go over it. First thing first is physical interoperability, which really refers to a medium to carry your data. That's it. So it could be a wireless network, it could be your phone, something to carry your data. So in fact, a good example right now is if I'm talking to you right now, the physical interoperability is actually the microphone and the speaker, right? That's carrying the data across. The next level is syntactic interoperability, the standard format adopted to enable machine-to-machine exchange of data. Or if I would use a common example, it could be language. I'm now speaking to you in English, not in Mandarin. That's syntactic interoperability. Or you could speak to me in your native tongue and I will have no idea. So syntactical. The next level would be semantic interoperability. So even though we might be speaking the same language, we may be using a different lingo, vocabulary, localization of the English language, which is very common. So that's semantic. So making sure that you understand exactly what I'm saying. Now, I'm going to play a little game with you guys just to illustrate interoperability. I'm going to say a word, a very simple English word. And when I say the word, your image of something associated with the word will come out. I want you to remember the image, the things associated with the word, and then you tell me later if I got it right. The word is plant. Very simple English word, plant. Now, how many of you guys think of the biological vegetation? Very simple word, common association. How many of you think of manufacturing plant? Well, here we go. We have physical interoperability. You can hear me really well. I'm using English, not a foreign language to you guys. But why is it that when I have the word plant, we have different interpretation? That is semantic interoperability. And that's important to emphasize. It is not easy to achieve semantic interoperability even in very normal industry. And healthcare, for information, is very complex. And to quote Charles Mead, who is very famous in our industry, syntactic interoperability guarantees the exchange of the structure of the data, but carries no assurance that the meaning will be interpreted identically by all parties. Now, just to give another real-life example, because when I talk to people on this topic, they say, no, Adam, we'll be careful. We'll look out for it. And I know there's supposed to be a speaker from NASA. I don't know if she's here today, but this is not intentional. It just happened to be my favorite example because it's impactful. In 1999, NASA lost $125 million, a small change, Mars climate orbiter because the outsourced company, Lockheed Martin, used the imperial units, the English units of calculating measurements, and where the in-house team used the American version. So the thing actually explodes. I can read on the web, the link provided. NASA, a bunch of really smart people, geniuses. They actually went through the due diligence and process and launched the orbiter. And this happened to them. Don't you think that this could potentially happen to us when we build our crowdsourcing platform, right? And for those who are not in the healthcare industry, I can assure you clinical terminologies is very confusing. You have your problem list. How do you define a problem? You can define a problem the different way I define a problem. And physicians, for your information, can be very interesting. Right, procedure list, how many ways can you call a X-ray of the left hand? Left hand X-ray, X-ray left hand, X-ray, some other manners, right? Progressive nodes, diagnosis, and medication. Medication is one of the biggest problems we have when you're trying to get semantic interoperability, because you try to run analytics, you try to run decision support, it's a huge issue, right? So to mitigate interoperability issues, we have the industry, the health informatics industry, actually develop health IT standards. Now, there's just one problem when it comes to standards related to work. Any one of you working with ISO related or ANSI related standards work will realize this, and it's actually quite difficult to articulate. So I actually found a very good cartoon to explain it, all right? So fundamentally, as long as someone tries to harmonize existing standards, they will end up creating new standards. And I'm going to give you a very common example again. Overseas delegates. This is something really simple, right? I mean, come on, electrical sockets. How tough can it be to fix this? But it is an issue. This is an interoperability issue. So what do you guys do? What do you guys do when you have this issue? You get an adapter. Simple solution. I'll tell you, healthcare is not that easy, my friend. Healthcare is really, really complicated, right? And what I have here is a diagram of standards development organization. This is a little bit dated, and the pointer is not that powerful to illustrate to you, but basically we have standards for disease classification, disease description, procedure description, images, clinical trials, and so on and so forth. And this is actually a pretty dated picture. There's actually more standards organizations, standards development organizations coming up in the world of healthcare IT space. So the previous diagram is actually pretty accurate. Someone tries to harmonize it, and we create new standards. But we're trying our very best. Okay? So some of the challenges you guys might face in this context when you're building a crowdsourcing platform, I'll share with you is be mindful. It is actually a very difficult task. It's an uphill task for you to identify the right standard for the data you're going to generate. And again, it depends a lot on what you're using your crowdsourcing platform for, right? Are you using for analytics? Are you using for clinical decision support? So it depends, right? So try to get it right the first time. And even if you do identify the right standard, right? Sometimes there are intentional and unintentional customization and non-compliances. This is very, very common in a few of the standards out there, for example, HR7, DICOM, and SNOMED. And sometimes things just happen because the standards get updated. Because you know what? Physicians come together and say, I think we should tweak this a little bit. And they do actually change the standard. So you have to actually retrofit stuff that you have. Not a lot of organization has the manpower, resources, and knowledge to do that. And then after a while, you actually get people using same standards, different versions, or same standards, localization, and you can't actually get the data together. So sometimes it's unintentional. So try to get it out right the first time. In addition, when you're building your crowdsourcing platform, be mindful of local laws and regulations. If you're using for diagnostic purposes, right, and you to ingest external data, find out whether you will be medically liable for the data. You didn't generate the data, but if you ingest it into a system, you may, and it's actually used for certain purposes, you may be liable for it. Another thing is data retention period. You find out how long you actually have to retain that data that you ingested. Right? For cancer patients, usually it's lifetime. So you actually have to factor for it. In addition, the last few points I have is data granularity. I actually work on what we call a clinical data repository project in one of the ASEAN countries. It's a national-wide countries. And they actually asked a very good question because data, the more granular you go in your data, the more storage you have. And we're building a clinical data repository for the whole country, you're going to end up storing a lot of data. And then there's a regulatory issue because you can store data for a long time. So they're saying, Adam, how low, how granular do I actually have to go for my data? And my answer is very simple, as granular as you can, because you never know when you're going to need the data for analytics purposes, for other purposes. So always try to keep it as granular as you can, as humanly possible. And also, there's an issue of data fluidity, right? Because of the clinical workflow, the example given by Richard earlier on, where there's a company that ingests data generated by the crowd into the electronic health record. So this is a place where you must be mindful. What sort of data is useful to you, right? If you're looking for diagnosis, chances are the initial data that's generated, the problem based on whatever, not so useful. You might not want to ingest that. You want to ingest the actual diagnosis and the problem description. But if you're doing data analytics, you might want to consider ingesting a lot more data for that. So it really depends, what are you using the crowd platform for? And then if you're doing stuff like patients like me, chances are you don't need to be bothered by this at all. Okay? And the last point I want to share with you is sources of truth, right? When you're talking about population or community level health, you actually have very, very different data points that's coming in. And you must actually be mindful, what is the correct data source, right? Because if you generate the wrong data source, that original data might be correct, but it may actually go through different channels and are tuned, by the way, for good or bad purposes. And if you actually ingest it at the wrong point in the workflow, at the wrong data source, chances are your data is going to end up being inaccurate. And this is actually a common problem found in healthcare institutions around the world, including Singapore, right? So I hope that has been useful to you. I only had 20 minutes. These type of lectures are going to go on for hours, actually. So to make up for that, you can drop me an email. I do take some time to reply to emails because I travel a lot, but I usually do reply them eventually. So with that, thank you for your time.